One. This is the Aspen City Council work session for September 26, 2022. Tonight's agenda, 2 items: building code adoption and review of Lumberyard development application. And I guess, Philip, are you introducing this first item?
It is my pleasure, Mayor Tory and Council. Thank you for having us this evening. Are we all set with the slide deck? With your permission, we'd like to share our screen.
You bet.
And while we're doing that, I'd like to just introduce some of the folks at the table, as well as some of the folks who are not at the table will be shortly. Again, Dennis Murray, who's our plans examination manager, has been at the city for over a quarter decade and is nationally renowned authority on building code matters. Nick Thompson, who is on our plans examination staff and is quickly becoming a nationally renowned authority on building and energy code matters. Nick recently was successful in getting a handful of amendments passed by the International Code Council for inclusion in the upcoming, is it the 2022 codes that those will be in, or the 2024? Excuse me, the 2024
right.
commercial codes. And then Bonnie Muhigirwa, who's our interim chief building official at this time, and she's also on the ICC governing committee, their membership council. And so I don't want to steal Dennis's thunder here. He's got some more sort of resume building information, but I'm really pleased to present a panel of experts from our building department to walk through the work that's been done for the last year in response to council direction at a previous work session on development of the next round of building and energy codes for the city of Aspen. And really our purpose here this afternoon is to present that work to you, make sure that there's alignment between council's policy objectives with respect to the building code and the built environment, and any potential amendments that we can include in the building code, which will ultimately be presented to you in ordinance for your consideration in November. And so by the first of the year, if everything goes smoothly, it is our intention to have a new Title VIII adopted, which is an exciting milestone for our department. We do this every 6 years. And I think, as has been pointed out by council members in the recent past, the city remains an innovator with respect to how we think about building safety and building energy use and how that translates into our world-class built environment. I'm really confident that the work you're going to see from this team this afternoon is going to reflect another round of innovation on that topic and be commensurate with your expectations based on the conversation we had a year ago at this table, but in another building. And just briefly, some thanks to go around for supporting the work of this team for the last year. Tyler Christoph and the City Utilities team, Tessa Schreiner, the City Climate Action team, August Haas, Resource Engineering, and Crested Butte, Shauna Mazingo with Mazingo Code Consultants here in the Valley have all been instrumental in helping our staff present to you some of the information you're going to see this afternoon and will ultimately be included in an ordinance. So with that, I'll hand it over to Bonnie and her team to walk you through some of the information.
Thanks, Philip. So there we go. Our agenda today is to first introduce the 2021 building code adoption and amendments process, to go over some of our amendments regarding resiliency, and then get into the amendments regarding carbon reduction, which cover electrification, energy efficiency, the Renewable Energy Mitigation Program, also known as REMP, and net zero. So the international codes are a body of coordinated codes widely adopted throughout the United States. The purpose of these codes are to ensure that the built environment is safe, accessible, sustainable, and resilient. In order to do this, the codes need to be regularly updated. Internationally, the codes are updated every 3 years through a governmental consensus process. Aspen historically has adopted codes every 6 years, so skipping one cycle of the international codes. So we are currently on the 2015 version of the codes, and we are looking to adopt the 2021 codes. As part of this process, we are also looking to update our local building code amendments, which are found in Title 8 of the Municipal Code. Our current timeline plans to have the full adoption package ready for first reading on November 29th, with a second reading on December 13th. So back in May 2021, we began this adoption process. We had a work session, and what we came away from that work session was that with this adoption, we really wanted to focus on responding to the climate emergency. We saw an opportunity to align our building and energy codes with the climate action plan, and we also were seeking a robust energy code that went above and beyond both the national standard and even above our regional partners. So rather than focusing on regional coordination, we wanted to make Aspen a leader and see where we could innovate. And in the past, the energy code has really focused on reducing energy usage, but we are now looking to broaden that to reduce carbon emissions. So one key aspect of responding to the climate emergency is by ensuring that our built environment is as resilient as possible and that we are prepared to handle natural disasters, particularly wildfires. Everyone who was in the valley in 2018 for the Lake Christine fire, which is shown here, remembers the threat to structures as well as the threat to our power grid. We've also seen recent destruction due to the wildfires in Louisville, Superior, and other Front Range communities. The draft ordinance that we are preparing contains amendments that will require all new construction to be fire sprinklered. Previously, there was an exemption that buildings under 5,000 square feet did not require sprinklers, but now all buildings will be required. New construction will also be required to have fire-resistive techniques to make it more resistant to the wildfires. On the power grid side, we are looking for new construction to be pre-wired for on-site power generation and energy storage to provide backup energy during future emergencies. We also want to discuss how addressing carbon reduction will happen through these code amendments. In January of this year, Council formally adopted the science-based targets as the city's new climate goals. This includes the ambitious goal of reducing the 2017 emission levels 63% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. Reaching these science-based targets will be impossible without significantly reducing emissions from buildings. Buildings are the largest emitting sector in Aspen. As you can see on this graph, the combined residential and commercial energy made up over half of the greenhouse gas emissions in 2017. Our draft ordinance targets both new buildings and existing buildings to reach these climate goals.
And I think it's important to point out for council too that the building code is a really effective tool for delivering on climate policy, energy policy, for new construction, for significant remodels, looking out into the future on a, frankly, it's sort of decades timeframe. We're also aware that there's a 7-year and 3-month fuse on the 63% goal that council has set for the community. And so think about the building code as one tool in concert with other programs like the Building IQ program that you just passed a few months ago for commercial buildings, which is very much designed to deal with the existing built environment as it is today and intervene in that way. And so the building code can address, again, our policy objectives over time. And some of those other programs coming out of the Climate Action Office are very much designed to address our existing condition. And so working together, we feel confident that we're setting the community on a path to help achieve that target.
Quick question. Can you go back to that last slide, please? Okay, the building emissions, commercial energy, residential energy, 25%, 33%. Is that the energy used to heat and make those buildings worthwhile?
Light them up.
And light them up?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm curious, so do the GHGs that are produced by the energy that's burned here, is that produced, those GHG gases produced where the energy is produced, say the wind farms or the hydropower plant?
Yeah. I don't want to give the wrong answer, and Tessa Schreiner is not here. I don't believe. And so I will say that the way that community emissions inventories are conducted, that some of the emissions from a community are assigned to the community even though they're created sort of extra-jurisdictionally. In other instances, emissions from our community are actually assigned elsewhere. So for example, the aviation number, I don't believe that 5% actually reflects the true greenhouse gas emissions profile from the airport. I think it's our community's share of that profile. But again, without Tessa here, I'm gonna say something wrong. But it rubs both ways depending upon the source and the topic.
Thank you. That's a good enough answer.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would appreciate a deeper dig into it when it comes forward with the code changes. And in particularly, you know, the buildings within the city limit, on the city electric, we have the 100% renewables. But they may also use natural gas and other greenhouse emission causing issues, or they have wood burning stoves still. So we'll need to kind of peel that number apart to see what those emissions are in total that you're asking. I think it's a great question.
And yeah, that aviation number seems suspect to me as well, but.
Yeah, this is from 2017. Was it 2015 we went 100% renewable?
Yes, 2015.
Mike, please.
That's
So-
correct.
No, Skippy, thank you.
I would like to see some kind of an overlay that would show energy usage laid over the top of greenhouse gas emissions. Because as has been pointed out, we buy our energy from Mean. It's not produced here, but it's zero emissions. It's supposed to be 100% renewable.
We will provide a more thorough dissection of the built environment greenhouse gas emissions profile for council at first reading.
Thank you.
Okay, looking as far as reducing the emissions of the built environment, we are focusing on 3 key strategies. The first being electrification, and then energy efficiency to reduce the energy use of a building, and then renewable offsets to offset the remaining energy use that can't be fully reduced. Electrification is probably the singly most important of these 3 categories as far as achieving Council and Aspen's greenhouse reduction goals. As you mentioned earlier, Council Member Hallenstein, we've got a 100% renewable grid with Aspen Utility, and Holy Cross will be renewable by 2030. So with that in mind, an all-electric building powered by a 100% renewable grid would be a zero emissions building. So therefore, this is really truly the only viable option for us to reach our 2050 goals. However, there are some significant challenges to get there. It's not going to be easy. The rapid pace of change in this sector is significant. We are every day learning new things in this space. And so for this reason, we are anticipating coming to you after this November ordinance in a much shorter time frame than typical to update this. Typically, we update our energy code and building codes on a 6-year cycle. With the rapid pace of change in this sector, electrification, I think we're going to need to be ready to adapt quicker. Another challenge is the unique energy load amenity desires of Aspen homeowners in this cold climate are significant. We currently see massive million BTU boilers in homes being installed so that during the holidays, which is typically Aspen's busiest time and coldest time, houses are kept warm, comfortable, multiple showers never run out of water, and driveways and patios are kept clear of snow. These amenities will require a massive amount of electricity to electrify them. And what makes electrification feasible in most communities are heat pumps. And heat pumps are a technology that is 3 to 4 times more efficient than natural gas or your typical electric resistant heating. However, they are not creating heat, they are moving heat. So they basically are an air conditioner running in reverse. They can pull heat and move it from the outside to the inside to heat up a space. In sub-zero conditions, it's capable of doing that, but it cannot produce the high temps needed for some of these amenities in these homes. Another thing with heat pumps is they take up a significant amount of space. So this is an example. I was just in Telluride over the weekend. They have a affordable housing project that they're pushing through that will have a 300 square foot driveway, garage entrance. They're proposing to heat that with an electric heat pump, and that's going to be an 8-ton heat pump. So picture on the slide there, an example, that's an 8-ton heat pump. It's almost 6 feet tall. That's going to serve just 300 square feet with their snow melt.
And
Each one of those is a heat pump?
No, the one on the bottom.
Oh, yeah, sorry. There's 2 things kind of being communicated there. That top picture shows a bank of smaller heat pump units, or condensing units, I should say. They're typically 2 pieces, an outside condensing unit and an inside coil. There are going to be some significant constraints in terms of space and visual impacts, acoustic impacts. They make noise.
And that's when we start to bump into the land use code. And we did some work on this particular topic in response to council's moratorium. You'll remember an element of the residential amendments was providing more latitude to applicants and the community development staff to allow for a certain amount of the building envelope to tread into setbacks in remodels so that we can allow people to upgrade their building envelopes to make them more energy efficient while not moving or deconstructing a building, right? So that's just one example. But long-term, and we know this from consultation with the utilities department as well as some of our experts as well, the need for mechanical technology to assist in meeting our built environment emissions reductions targets is going to require us to have a series of conversations about things like development in the setbacks, the relationship between lot size, building size, and the location of some of this material. We will rapidly bump into a lack of space for this, what I would consider, given our community's climate objectives, essential infrastructure, be it an electrical transformer on a site or a series of heat pumps or whatever it is. And the degree to which the size of our buildings is driving the location of those towards alleys, towards setbacks on lot lines that could then potentially impact neighbors, that's going to be a conversation, series of conversations that this and future councils will have to have in order to make sure that we have the space to accommodate this essential infrastructure.
Are you essentially saying that the heat pump technology can only bring a residence or commercial building to a certain level, and the balance of the heat or cooling needed, depending on the season, will be provided by electricity that we then hope to continue being on our renewable, non-fossil fuel sources?
So heat pumps can provide the majority of the space heating needs. There would be some degree of supplemental heat required,
Yeah.
and that could be done with electric resistance.
Okay, that's kind of, again, what I was wondering.
So that'd be the base heating. But then there are some other more energy-intensive energy uses, heating makeup air, snow melt, hot water heaters is probably the biggest one.
That heat pump that just doesn't do it for that.
Technically, it could be done. It would just be very onerous, significant numbers of heat pumps. So trying to, and again, this is an evolving space, and we're learning as much as we
Yeah.
can.
No, I understand what you're saying. I just was trying to put it in plain English a little bit.
Water heaters are a big source of energy usage, and there are now heat pump water heaters. And if you want to get confused, go out and look at a Mitsubishi Mini Split for 20,000 BTUs, and you get into elevation, what the low and high temperatures are during the year. So the technology is advancing quickly, but it's pretty confusing. So if you go, I've been looking at retrofitting our house, getting away from baseboard heats installed in the 70s to a mini split, and your mind starts to, well, my mind starts to swim when I start looking at all the options. But it's, yeah, and as far as some of these amenities, we can get into this when we get into the REMP fund, but maybe we should limit what some of those are instead of allowing people to buy carbon to offset them.
So all of those challenges to electrification are solvable, but it's going to take a thoughtful and phased approach for it to be successful. And as Philip mentioned, the building code is not going to be the only tool that the city will need to deploy. Staff believes that we will need a collaborative effort, and so some sort of multi-department task force comprised of Holy Cross Energy, the City of Aspen, utilities, planning staff, and the climate action team with the building department would be necessary for us to contemplate the long-term phasing of this full electrification necessity to reach our 100% reductions by 2050.
Yeah, one other quick comment. We just received kind of a late letter from Mona Newton via email, where she talks about the concern, and I think we've heard it in other formats, of the increasing electric demand and everyone now kind of trying to buy renewable energy from mean, and how much of a share can we increase over time for new development and electrification? How quickly can we ramp up our supplies of imported renewable energy? So it's just a question for us to consider again and it kind of backs up where you're saying that we're not quite ready to go all that way yet, but we'll get prepared and need to make sure all the other pieces are in line as we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to take some good coordination with all the partners, and certainly our utilities and their procurement of renewable energy.
I want to bring to attention of council prescriptive versus performance-based codes, that we can be very prescriptive about what size insulation and the roof, the walls, the windows, and all of that. But there's a new movement and federal money available for doing a pivot towards addressing our climate goals and greenhouse gas reductions by considering outcome-based codes. so that you would give more flexibility to the designers and the construction people as to how to meet that, that performance level. And I certainly support where we're going and staff's efforts on this regard, but really think it's important to look at federal funds that are available for adoption. And Aspen is positioned very nicely because we have a state partner for funding, and we're along the way for building IQ. So as we go forward, I really want to consider the outcome-based codes and give more flexibility and probably easier enforcement than the building codes. And as far as the delivery of electricity, I was discussing this with Tyler just before we started, is that we better make sure that we can supply the electricity, have the infrastructure for it, and Holy Cross has the infrastructure for it before we require and where the demand is developing for more electricity.
Yeah, so a couple questions. I saw that suggestion from Ward, and I had an initial gut reaction to it, but I'm wondering, just sort of staff's thoughts around prescriptive versus performative or outcome-based codes, and sort of how we think about that or plan to think about it.
I mean, I'd like to start with a sort of policy response, and then these guys can talk a little bit about the details. But for me, it's a yes and. And it gets back to my comment earlier about the relationship between a program like Building IQ and the building code, and our ability to use different tools to get to an outcome, right? And the Building IQ program really is an example of a form of sort of outcome-based built environment management, where you have an existing resource and you have an identified target. We want to reduce energy use in this building by X amount, and we're going to provide you with some guidance. We're going to provide you with some data. We're going to get some data too, and we're going to give you the tools to help get you there to respond to a mandate, right? And so whether we're talking about new construction and being prescriptive on the front end, and then once that building is a part of our maturing built environment, having programs and systems in place to manage ongoing that building's energy use, we feel like at least at this point in time, that's kind of the best approach the community can take. But if there's other details, please jump in.
I'll say that out-based codes is something that staff has been considering. It does represent a massive, massive shift to how the city in general, how we do business, but we are considering it. And we've recognized that a first step to get in that direction is to collect better data. And so actually that's a good segue into my next point was we believe we need to collect better data, and therefore we'd like to enroll all new construction and remodels into the Building IQ benchmarking program.
Got it. Cool. Okay, I appreciate that. I mean, my initial reaction to Ward's was, more minds working on a problem are better than less, and so the outcomes-based approach provides the platform for that to happen. But I'm really supportive of what we have going forward, and I'll be eager to know from staff, not just at first reading, but like over the next 6 or 10 years, what does that look like, and what are the trade-offs? Because it's so easy to come to a snap judgment about this label versus this label, and of course, it's never that simple. So I'm eager to learn more from staff.
So in this vein of looking at long-term solutions for specifically for electrification, but this kind of goes in line with the outcome-based code thing as well. Does council support staff's proposed approach for building electrification utilizing a multi-departmental task force?
And before we get to that, can you tell us a little bit about what the rest of your PowerPoint presentation in here? Where are we in sequence? Are you going over efficiency and offsets in the same
Sure.
manner that you did with electrification?
Yeah, sorry. We will go through a little bit more electrification. So this is our long-term solution. We do have some immediate solutions as part of this ordinance. And then next we'll discuss how we can reduce energy use and offset it to help get buildings ready for electrification.
Okay. Are there any questions in response to what's being asked of you at this time?
I can support the staff's phased approach to electrification as outlined and described in the memo. What I understood is that any new construction will need to be constructed to be electrification ready, and so there won't be retrofitting required other than some more minor hooking up or turning off the older systems. So with that in mind and being able to see the power generation, delivery availability, and the demand kind of concurrently ramping up, I can support that approach.
Ward?
Yeah, I don't know what a multi-departmental task force is comprised of. It's the first time I've seen this when I read the packet. I think it's an all hands on deck, and I do want to see outcome-based performance as part of this question for a long-term solution. But I think that it's kind of like a transportation. There's no single solution, so everything that we can do, I'm supportive of it. I think we might get to this in one of the next couple of phases, but I think we can immediately say that we don't want to have any more gas fireplaces outside or outdoor gas-powered heaters for temporary events. I think those are some changes that we can make and have. If you want to have an outdoor event, electrify it. So I think putting off some of this stuff, I don't see a reason to put it off. And that we might come up with that with the REMP funding and the offsets, but those are my thoughts as we go forward here.
Skippy?
My only question is, as we move towards an all-electrified future, we already have instances where we have concerns about the load of the city network. And so I guess what's our plan to either increase efficiency or capacity to meet the higher level of demand over time?
Tyler, would you care to join us at the dais, please?
If I'm understanding the premises correctly.
Tyler, if you want, you can also get comfortable over there. Thanks, man.
There, but not comfortable, one or the other.
Before you answer that, because I think this is kind of something that is an undercurrent for all of us. You know, this is where our values, our goals, come to reality check. And so I think there's a sensitivity that you're hearing directly in the nature of the question that Skippy's posing, but also I think in what a lot of us are thinking about. How hard are we pushing in the right or wrong areas? What are our obstacles? What are returns? I also heard from Ward that, you know, he has a concern about work plan, involvement, and you know, starting a process that, again, appropriateness, timing to get in. So I just want to frame it with that in mind, because I think we all have that concern of where these clash and meet. So
lots to unpack there, but I'll just start with big credit to community development and the building department. They've involved utility staff from the very get-go, and I think, you know, council has a unique opportunity here to leverage, you know, an in-house utility with in-house building science experts to kind of create a product that a lot of other communities haven't been able to put out there. As far as the grid, that's something that council's familiar with. We're constantly looking at to update our infrastructure. In the last year, you guys have approved a number of contracts that have allowed us to move forward with the physical infrastructure underground that will ultimately support electrification in the long run. At a national level, you're seeing this play out, the clash between resources and demand, essentially. And right now, with everybody, all these legislative pushes towards renewable energy, this clash is becoming more and more apparent with some brownouts and blackouts on the grid, et cetera. The reality is, based on current regulations, we're not able to build renewable generation fast enough to keep up with the demand on a macro scale on the U.S. grid. On a more local scale, we have the ability to do that much better, and that's why we've approached council with some of these local renewable projects, and that's how we're working locally in Aspen to make sure that the demand and the supply don't get too far out of whack. So I guess the answer is we're continuing to work on those. We're looking to the future. We have projects in the pipeline that will help us mitigate and address some of these issues that are coming up. I think council's wise to take a thoughtful approach here, and I appreciate the questions. I think building group did a great job of kind of outlining some of those challenges. Those are things that we've chatted about as a group, and I think the technology will evolve to a spot where it addresses a lot of these concerns, but that's, I think, why we're advocating for this phased approach to make sure we adapt as technology adapts.
And if I can just add on that too, what the building department staff is recommending are, I think, a suite of tools, including this task force, including electrification ready, including, and we'll get to this later in the presentation, more frequent targeted code amendments and adoptions that's going to allow us to respond to the changing circumstances that Tyler's describing and the changing circumstances that Nick's describing. Because this is a rapidly evolving field, and sometimes the science moves really far ahead, and sometimes the communities are driving the science. And we believe that what we're recommending is going to create a system whereby our community can both be an innovator and respond to innovation as quickly as possible. And so, as opposed to saying, here's the objective, here's the plan for taking the objective, and it's static, I think what we're suggesting is an ongoing collaboration between policymakers and staff in order to identify shorter-term objectives and get there, which we believe is the best approach to meet the long-term goal.
Just one follow-up question, and this may be a little bit too weedsy, but I'm curious, right? So we have the issue of capacity, how much we're generating on the grid, but of course with renewables, so much of that issue comes down to storage because we're not producing when we need and peaks and all that. And I think one of the bigger macro trends we'll see is the move to electric vehicles and the opportunity to store potentially public energy in a private vehicle on grid. And I just wonder, is that part of our thinking at this point when we think about, built environments because they have to plug in somewhere?
Yeah, I think council made a couple moves coordinating with staff to help the utility future-proof for those incoming technologies. So our advanced metering infrastructure was one of those moves that allows us to look at the use of kind of private storage for demand management on the grid. So we have the bones in place, if you will, to be able to address those as the technology improves and is more common. I guess at a grid scale, we also, in partnership with our wholesale energy provider, use a lot of utility scale storage. So right over the divide is Twin Lakes and Turquoise Lake, and there's pumped hydro storage there, which helps us balance some local load on the larger grid. So.
Cool. That's helpful. Thank you.
Tyler, is the electric grid in Aspen reverse meter capable?
In terms of spinning your meter backwards if you're producing. So we provide, if somebody is generating, has distributed generation on their home, yes, the meter spins backwards and gives them a credit, and that we carry that credit indefinitely.
Thank you.
And yes, I'm supportive. Sorry.
Any comments here?
Yeah, I'm fully supportive of the phased approach, as much as I'd like to jump in like Crested Butte has and require that all new buildings be electrified. What I'm hearing from staff is we're not confident that we can do that at this point. So phased is the way to go.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is back to the data collection piece of this. Does council support staff's recommendation that new construction and alterations be added to the Building IQ benchmarking program to provide better data for future electrification policy.
Yes.
Pick them up.
Yeah, but I don't, although I represent the city of Aspen on CORE, and REMP is a huge funder for CORE, I just don't think it's right that people buy carbon. So I would rather see we demand less electrical use than allowing people to buy carbon offsets. We've directed CORE for the last couple of years to diversify funding so that they are not as reliant on the REMP funding. And there's just something that is really objectionable to me for somebody to build a huge home and to have all this energy usage and have all this money and just go, well, I'm just going to pay the offsets. So I really want to see that we are looking at reducing energy usage as well as reducing greenhouse gases. And again, as a conflict of interest with funding for CORE, I object to people being able to buy greenhouse gases.
Agreed.
Well, I just want to making sure that everybody supports that last goal, question, recommendation, I should say. And I just wanted to state, Tessa was a member of the committee that was formulating these recommendations, so I feel comfortable with that. I was just saw her presentation to a group at a conference last week. So I understand that our Building IQ program is, to use an analogy that gets used up here a lot, flying the airplane while building it. So I am concerned about workload. I don't think it's necessarily that that's a tipping point or anything, but I am conscientious of it as well. Just getting the Building IQ program off the ground, and then having this as a new part of it. I don't know what that entails for additional work on this. So I can respect staff's recommendation here, but I do have a sensitivity to how this works into the work that's already going on.
We appreciate that very much, and the new code will be adopted around the first of the year when the ordinance actually takes effect, or after the first of the year when the ordinance takes effect, and we're talking about significant remodels and demolitions, and those frankly take a long time to get to building permit. And so we're really confident that with respect to the direction we just received on residential new construction and remodels, that there's going to be a significant sort of spool up period before those projects actually are asked to participate in a program, and that program will be up and running.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Rachel.
Yeah, no, I was going to just respond to Tori's first question. Ward, I agree with you in a sense, but I not as perhaps wholeheartedly. I think that the REMP program has created a transactional economy, and the offsets are real. But there's a point at which you say, okay, no more snow melt for driveways, and they start paying someone to drive up Highway 82 with a plow on a many-ton truck to plow that driveway. And there's no offset whatsoever for that energy use or that type of energy use. And so I get concerned with the unintended consequences of it. I would like to see our codes and going forward, building codes as tight as possible and realistic to be able to make buildings less energy dependent and reduce their energy consumption. But I don't think that we would be eliminating all things that REMP applies to unless we were to say, okay, building sizes have to be cut in half, these sort of amenities aren't allowed, you can only have this much power in your house no matter how many computers you want to run. I just see that as being really draconian. That is not in a way that I'd like to go. And so I do think that REMP provides a appropriate safety valve. And if anything, we should ask whether are the REMP numbers sufficient to really offset that use ongoing in perpetuity, or is it really just a one-time fee that only mitigates the first 10 years of that carbon production or whatever? But so I can't, again, I'm agreeing with the general concept that the code itself should be the most enforcing mechanism for reducing energy use. And I do think that the REMP still may have a role. If we get to a point where the building codes make REMP unneeded and homes are being built and energy supplies are 100% available for 100% electrification, I think we'd be in a different world, but we're really not there yet.
Yeah, Rachel, I really applaud you bringing up that balancing act between, and I was just talking about performance versus prescriptive being more governmental interference, and then I come in on the other side of this side and go, well, maybe government should say we can't do all of these things. So it's that balancing act that we have to find. And you know, I agree with all your points.
Yeah, no, I mean, really, we've seen the county up their code in such a way that they weren't getting the same amount of rent contributions. And if we end up going in that direction, that's fine with me too. But, so I want as much as possible in the code, but I think at least for now, there's still a place for some REMP, and maybe we should make sure the REMP fees are sufficient. Thank you.
And then, if you don't want, Ward, what's the elevator answer for what conversation at CoA has happened around what Rachel brings up there? Because I know you've considered it, you, as you said yourself a second ago, at CoA, you have looked at a strategy for diversifying funding and realizing that it should be going. So what's the short kind of talk on that?
I think this council 2 years ago directed CoA to diversify funding. We're aware that the rent funds from the county have decreased drastically. So I guess, Tori, I don't have that elevator speech, but I think that the goal that we've identified as a top 3-tier goal is greenhouse gas, reducing greenhouse gas, and how we get there is what we're here for. So I know that if we increase the fees, that'll increase REMP and make more grant money available for other people. And that's how the REMP gets, helps in the greenhouse gas in the long run. We could use those increased funds for, say, workforce housing, retrofitting some of the old buildings.
Yeah, either that or the increased fees would force people to put more energy producing things on their own residence or reduce their energy consumption of their residence. So through the architectural design. So either way, it's an efficient program.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, you've all brought up some great points and concerns, and we will be addressing a lot of those as we go through this presentation. We've just talked about some long-term solutions, a long-term phased approach with collaboration with our other departments. We do have some immediate solutions as part of this 21 code adoption November ordinance. First is to incentivize electrification, and we'll go into more detail at the end of this presentation. In the meantime, we can do everything we can to prepare buildings. And that would include pre-wiring for electric appliances and equipment to the best that we can. And then the big thing really is to reduce that energy use, as you guys have touched on. Let's get that energy use as low as possible. And we have a very robust energy efficiency proposal for you. In addition to that, we know we're never going to get the energy use to zero. And we know eventually we want to get it to all electric so that it's zero emissions on our grid. In the meantime, we can offset that energy use and disincentivize it to the best we can.
So highlighting some of the proposals that will be in the new draft ordinance for November. We are proposing that new buildings will be built to a very high level of performance. The proposed amendments will increase the efficiency of every part of the building and its systems with a major focus on the thermal envelope. The envelope, as you can see all the depictions here, we've got the roof, walls, windows and doors, foundation. And these components are the hardest parts of the building to upgrade in the future. So we are proposing that new buildings be built to a standard that will hold up well into the future, but is also achievable today. These code measures will be 30 to 40% more efficient than our current code, and 20 to 30% more efficient than the baseline 2021 International Energy Code. Some of these efficiency proposals were already incorporated into the requirements for demolition allotments, but this ordinance will expand many of them to all new buildings. And one analogy that we like to think of with this is going from a fleece to a down jacket.
The down jacket
I
standard.
do both.
Yeah.
At the same time?
And I find the choice of Patagonia to be very appropriate in this instance. Thanks.
Yeah, that's right. Amazing, huh?
Again, we're focusing on new building, but we have a lot to be gained by retrofitting old buildings, and that's a challenge.
That's the duct tape patch model.
Yeah.
Very familiar up here.
And we will have various stages of alteration that would kick in some of these requirements to existing buildings as well.
Were there evaluations done on cost for these new standards?
There have been studies done for the 2021 baseline codes, but we can provide more on our level of
I'd be
codes for
interested.
first reading, yeah.
Thanks.
Sure.
I'd like to support that request as well, but if possible, is there any balancing information that by this much investment in the energy efficiency, future utility bills will be expected to be reduced by what? So a little bit of kind of the performance contracting model, so that, yes, we are requiring you to spend more, but we know it'll save you more on that end once you're living in it,
Sure.
you know.
We've seen fee-bates in appliances and cars. Maybe we should consider a fee-bate for high electrical usage, that you pay a fee if you're gonna use a lot more energy than most people, and that you get a rebate if you use less. So, I mean, we could just say, Tyler would love this, so we're just gonna increase the rates across the board.
So Ward, our current rate structure is that inverted block tier structure, so it does exactly that, or it's intended to do exactly that. Those extraordinary users are paying a premium per kilowatt hour.
Okay.
So we've already touched a bit on the Renewable Energy Mitigation Program and its benefits. One of the big purposes of the program is to encourage reduction in energy use, to make people think twice about snow melting a large section of their driveway or other amenity loads. The REMP program has been around since the 1990s and has been one of our earliest energy code efforts. I think you're all familiar with the basis of the program to require energy use on a property to either be offset with on-site renewables, typically solar PV, or through a payment option. And you were already discussing a little bit about some of the trade-offs between on-site renewables versus the payment option. You know, we have the advantage of on-site renewables addressing that building's energy use. It's not always feasible. Some of our lots don't have the advantage of good solar, and you know, for various reasons, space constraints and whatnot, sometimes the payment option is really what makes sense. It's a community scale investment. CoA programs have, they've done studies to show that they have 12 times the impact on energy consumption, and leads to significant greenhouse gas emissions reduction throughout our community. Properties also have the flexibility of doing a combination of on-site renewables and the payment option. So our current REMP program is targeted at exterior energy uses, namely snowmelt, pools, and spas. In this draft ordinance, we are proposing expanding. We will continue to offset snow melt, but we are also proposing to have a cap on total snow melt, as well as heat tape, gas fireplaces and fire pits, both indoor and outdoor, as well as outdoor heaters, which you can see in this picture here. One fact that I was really shocked by when we were putting this presentation